Christian parenting.
Welcome to Called to Love, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adoptive mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption isn't just a process. It is an invitation to go on a journey with the Lord where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same.
And now the continuation of last week's conversation with Andrea Lennon.
So for me, what has happened is that through this journey, I've learned that I can trust God. And I don't know of anything that has been more groundbreaking, earth-shattering, truly transformative than that one statement. I can trust God with my life. I can trust Him with my heart. I can trust Him with my story. He is my rock and refuge. He is my safe place. He sees me. He knows me. He loves me. He cares for me. And He's doing way more than I could ever ask, think, or imagine. So why in the world would I want to be in control when He clearly is so good? And so I would say that's an example of how it's impacted my journey with my Lord, and then with my parents. You know, I just think it has been a journey of us having to learn how to communicate with one another about the topic of adoption. My parents and we're just so close. I just love them so much, but they're quiet and private. And I am not. Shocker, right? Summer, shocker. Right. I am not quiet and I'm not private. I'll tell you all of my business. And so I had to learn to take the lead when it came to communicating about this. And they have not backed down one bit. And so if you're an adult adoptee and you've never had this conversation with your parents, let me challenge you, take the lead. Yeah. Take the lead and do it in a way that's loving and affirming and gracious. And I think you'll find that they want to be there for you in this space. They just might not know how.
Yes, that's a great word. And it's so important for us to remember, and just the perspective that you give is just so, so valuable. And as I'm thinking about this, and you're talking about that 7-year span of time where you weren't where you wanted to be spiritually in a relationship with the Lord, but the Lord knew all along, and He was holding you all along through that. And I'm sure, you know, as parents in general, but certainly as Christian parents and as adopted parents, we want to hear what you just said, that you are trusting in the Lord and knowing and living in His goodness and surrendering your life and your path and your story to Him. But for so many of us representing our listeners today, that may not be the case for our kids. And so we're in this kind of push-pull relationship with our kids where they want to hold you close because you are the anchor that they have attached to in whatever time frame that they have joined your family through adoption, whether it's through newborn or as an older child. And they want to cling close to you because you do feel safe, but at the same time, they also want to self-protect, so they push away. So there's this constant wrestling match that goes on, sometimes even physically. I remember my daughter as a newborn and not understanding that separation trauma from her biological mother. She wouldn't let me leave her line of sight, but yet when I would try to hold her, she would push me away and she would scream bloody murder. And I didn't understand. And like you said earlier, I took it personally. And that was a real struggle for me. But then that can also translate as they get older and how they relate to you. And so how would you encourage and maybe even give hope to some of our adoptive parents who are listening right now and they're like, I'm trying so hard, Andrea. I'm trying to relate. I'm trying to be open for communication, but they are just pushing me away. What do you do? What do you say? What do they do?
Well, hang in there is the first thing. I mean, just take a deep breath. Know that God is at work. He's doing more than what you can see, what you can measure, what you can comprehend. And for that child, you are a picture of the gospel, whether they realize it or not. And then I so firmly, you know, plant that truth in your life. Also give yourself a space to breathe, because this is hard. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Right. And so whenever you mess up, whenever you have a bad day, take a deep breath, talk to the Lord, go for a walk, grab a Coke or an ice cream with your girlfriend, reset, give yourself some space to be in a good place. But then also, and this is really where I want to speak into this question, remember your journey,
Yeah.
remember your struggles, remember how much you have fought the grace of God, the mercy of God, the
Yep.
love of God. And then remember and celebrate how good he's been to you. And I think that what that does is it helps us to reset and refocus on why we have done this, why we have brought this child in, which will help us to know what to do, especially in the hard times.
Yes.
So, we do this because God's called us. We do this because it's a picture of the gospel. We do this because God has said he's glorified through this, and the children are going to be encouraged through this, and the gospel is going to be shared through it. But it happens on the landscape of broken and messy and hard, and things that quite honestly we can't do apart from the strength of God. And
Yes.
so just remember how God's faithfully worked in your life. Remember how he called you into this. Remember why you're into it. And then just continue on, press on, friends, in consistency, in love, and remembering what the end goal is. While we do want our children to love us and to accept us, and we want those kind of picture perfect Instagram moments, I mean, we all do. We have to remember that this is real life, and that ultimately the win is for that child to place their faith in Christ,
That's right.
and for them to find him to be that safe place and that satisfaction. And through that process, because you have been pointing him along or her along in that journey,
Yeah.
you too will become a safe place. It's not
Yeah.
going to happen overnight, and it may not happen the way you want it to happen or the way you thought it would happen. But if I truly believe that if we hang in there and if we hang on and we do the hard work and we trust God, that redemption and restoration are on the way. And so just keep on keeping on.
It's a good word. Absolutely. And something we need to remind ourselves of regularly, because in the midst of the hard, in the midst of the feelings of rejection and seeing your children struggle, which is just a parent's worst nightmare, we do need to remember that that is our ultimate goal and purpose, is to point our kids to Christ and pray like crazy that
Yes.
they will
Yes.
surrender to that calling and live out their own authentic faith walk with Christ. And so
Yes.
as I'm thinking about this for your journey in particular, I'm curious, is there anything that looking back or even now that you wish your adopted parents would have known, that you are like, I need adopted parents to know this going forward in their journey?
Mm. Yeah, I think just the need for truth and communication, I think is very, very important. Now, I think today's world is a little bit different than, the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up. We didn't have as much education and information about the need for communication and transparency and processes to do that. But I wrote down in my notes, as I was preparing for my time with you, talk about it, celebrate it, look for the goodness of God in the midst of it. Be proactive about helping to frame the adoption in a positive way, in a Christ honoring way. Let your child have that struggle, but don't leave them there. Give them the space to have that, but don't give in to that.
Yeah.
Always be fighting for the truth to be lived out in and through your family.
Yeah.
And so and another thing I would say, and I think this is so important, is and I love that Connected does this. I love that other ministries do it. You need a support group of people who are walking through this with you.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that maybe my parents didn't know about or didn't have. Other people who were in this journey, because it's a different dynamic. They had two adopted children, they had one biological child. We were all very close in age. And so, are there other families in your church? Are there other families in your community who are navigating this? And if so, how can you link arms, for the purpose of encouragement, for the purpose of just perseverance, and just allowing God to build some strong bonds and networks, so that when you're down and they're up, they can encourage you, and vice versa.
Yes.
So I think communication is huge. I think, and this is something else I wanted to say, and this might be a good place to interject this in the conversation. I think it's very important for a parent and that's biological adoptive, to accept their child's story. I think
Yes.
that's very important. I don't think that I think it makes it harder for the child to work through their story if their parent is ashamed of it or embarrassed by it or trying to minimize it or change it.
Yes.
That is their story. And so we want to bring hope into the story. We want to bring the transformation into the story, the gospel into the story, redemption into the story. And we bring that through the message of the gospel. But if you go all the way back to the garden, Genesis chapter 3, what did God do after sin entered? The world with the Adam and Eve. He had a conversation with them and he established truth through a series of questions.
Yeah.
And so I just think truth is so important. So if
Yes.
we're trying to minimize that child's story, change that child's story, reframe that child's story, then I think that we're adding an element of struggle into the story, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
So let the story be what it is, because God does good things in broken situations.
Yeah.
Share in age appropriate ways and in stages if needed, but always in truthful ways.
Yeah.
And then just watch what God's going to do. So I think, communication and truth are they're vital in these conversations.
Yes, I agree completely. And that's a really good reminder for us because you've given us so much truth to anchor to and to move forward in our own journeys as individuals and as Christian adoptive parents. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least identify maybe some pitfalls that we as adoptive parents can
Mm,
fall into. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking, okay, I've talked to several adult adoptees in my career. And one of the things that they've really struggled with was what you mentioned just a moment ago was honoring their child's story, because a lot of times our adult adoptees or even teen adoptees can feel like tokens and something that our families brag about because they did something so holy or something amazing. And I don't share this in an accusatory way or even a just, beating you over the head, guilt-ridden way. But I think sometimes we do that because, again, we're excited about our side of things. Like, yay, look what we got to do. And look who this is. And yay, it isn't she cute or isn't he adorable or, whatever. But what that can do and what that really speaks to the heart of their adoptive child who are already navigating a really difficult part of their story. What are some other pitfalls that you think would be healthy for us to mention just for our families to be aware of, Andrea?
um, okay, I think, and this goes back to the why you're adopting.
Yeah.
And I've seen this play out in a couple of different situations. If you're adopting to meet and fulfill a need within you, I would say slow down. I would
Yes.
say hit that pause button, because you're setting that child up in a sense to have to fulfill something within you.
Correct.
And that child's already going through so much in terms of loss and in terms of having to try to figure out who they are, where they belong, that you're adding on to their struggle. And so I would say check those motives from the very beginning and get a gospel call on your life. And so I think that that's very important. I think the other thing that are just pitfalls, and maybe this is just because of some of my struggles. When you are in conversations where you have adopted children who don't know their backstory, who don't know their background, who don't, they just have no frame of reference. Be careful about your conversations that highlight that,
Yeah.
because if and this is just one of those things that if you haven't experienced it for yourself, you don't really know what some of those things are. So educate yourself.
Yeah.
For example, I struggled when my boys were born because we would all sit around the table and we would talk about Jake has his eyes or his personality or her smile or her dimple or this, that, or the other. And all I heard them say was, Andrea, you don't know anything about your story.
Mm,
Like that's what I would hear. And so
yeah.
that's something that's very normal, right? But it created a loss in me that set me back in a sense. Now I wasn't spiritually mature enough in that young mother age. I was very emotional to recognize what was going on. But honestly, and I'm just being very honest, it made me kind of put my kids at arm's length initially because
Yeah.
I'm like, now they have something that I don't have.
Yeah.
They have a story that I can't understand, that I can't help shepherd because they were my first blood relatives
Right.
that I would know,
Yeah.
that I could look at. And so I think that's why I said early on in the podcast, this is so layered. And that's why communication is so necessary. Something that, Summer, for you and for your husband, that would be completely normal to have that conversation would be, for me, through my perspective, be very challenging. And so
Yes.
that's why we have to have this safe place for me to be able to say, hey, that's hard for me.
Yeah.
That creates some anxiety in me, that creates some struggle in me. And finally, I did say that, at family gatherings, we're not going to sit around and just talk about, who he looks like. We're going to let him be his own person.
Right.
We're going to celebrate who he is. And I had to set a boundary there because it was not healthy for me.
Yeah.
So I look back now and I'm like, yes, there was some immaturity in that. I had not worked through my stuff for sure. And so it was surfacing. But at the same time, if my, extended family members had that perspective, they would not have wanted to create that hardship.
Of
And
course.
so just looking through our conversations and our actions and reactions through the lens of that adoptive child and the loss, and the transitions that they've had to navigate, I think will help us to be sensitive and then to have the conversations that we can all be a part of. And
Yeah.
that's what we want. So the
Yeah.
conversations we can all be a part of for my kids were our hopes and dreams for the future, right? So we put our eyes on what's ahead, and we started praying towards that end and planning towards that end and coming together towards that end. And so that is just those are small examples. But even now, as I'm telling those to you, I mean, even now I'm having a physical reaction in my stomach about it. Like, it
Mm.
was so hard, and it was
Yeah.
so, and I think that probably for a female, who is an adoptive child, childbirth is very emotional anyway.
Sure.
It's just, it brings all of that back up. And so those were those things that I didn't realize until I walked through them. But now that I've walked through them, I can share that perspective.
Yes. I appreciate you being so vulnerable in that, because that is so valuable for us to hear. And not, there's this fine balance, right? Because we don't want to walk around with a chip on our shoulder, and we don't want to walk around walking on eggshells around our family members and not knowing what to do, and everybody being uptight, because then that just
Yeah.
completely hinders connection and building trust, as we've talked about today. But that mindfulness, and it just made me think as you were talking, it's how the Lord relates to us. He's such a personal God, and he meets us right where we are. And that's a way where we can be the hands and feet of Jesus to those that we love, that are so near and dear to us, is being aware of that and being willing to pivot what we do compared to what other people do, and not because we're so afraid that we're going to trigger somebody, although, because trigger kind of gets a bad rap, and it's a very common thrown around word now. But you're right, it creates a physiological response when that is something that
Yes.
is felt hurt and trauma for you. And so we want to be mindful of that, and certainly I can see things like that in my own child, and I'm sure listeners, you can identify those things as well. So that's really, really helpful for you to bring that up. And I'm curious, as we're wrapping up our conversation today, how have you seen God redeem
Mm,
the hard parts of your story, and leave us
amen.
with a word of encouragement and all of that? Because I think as we're in the trenches, whether our listeners right now are like, listen, I'm just buried in paperwork right now, and I haven't even laid
Mhm.
eyes on that child yet, but my heart is longing for that child, and it is so hard to wait. Or whether our parents are listening and they're like, listen, I'm in the throes of tough behavior and fighting for connection, and trying to lead my child through healing, or wherever they might be in that journey. How have you seen God redeem those hard parts, and how would you leave us with a word of encouragement?
Well, thank you for that question, because this is where God gets all the glory. That he is a redeeming God, that he is restoring, that he is plotting our redemption in ways that we can't see, that we can't understand, but they are so real. They are so tangible. He brings purpose out of the pain. He brings meaning out of the mess. He brings, beauty out of the ashes. And the way that I have seen that the most, not only just in this area of my life, but across the landscape of my life, is the fact that the thing that I probably would have changed about my life, my adoption for many years, is the one thing that I would never change now. I
Wow.
would never change it. I would never change it. I would not go back. I would not change one bit of the story, because, and I say this with just all respect, before the Lord and with one another, I just believe that the adoption has allowed me to understand the gospel at a very deep level, a
Yeah.
very deep level. I think about those 5 days when I was in the hospital, helpless and hopeless, waiting on someone to come and to rescue me and to bring me into their family, to give me standing, to give me love, not based upon anything I had done, but based upon totally their intent and their desire. That is what Jesus did for us when he came. He lived, he died, he rose again. He was on a rescue mission for you and for me. He loved us. He is God's demonstrated love. Our life is changed and transformed the moment we put our faith in him. We move from spiritual death to spiritual life. We have full free standing, not based upon what we've done, but upon who he is and what he has done. And
Amen.
so I celebrate my adoption. And that is how I've seen God just show up and change my life, change my perspective. I know about sanctification. I know about struggle. I know about, the lies of the enemy being replaced with the truth of God's good redeeming word, because I've lived it out. I've been in the pits and I've seen God bring me out of it. And so what is my encouragement to you? Hang on to a redeeming God. Hang on to an able and good God who sees you in that struggle, who sees you in that brokenness, but is not about to leave you there. And
Yeah.
so I think whenever we have that truth planted in our hearts and minds for our life, and we see and celebrate that truth for us, we can pour that truth into another person's life. And so
Yes.
wherever you are in the journey, if you're filling out the paperwork, do it for the glory of God. If you are, rocking that baby all night long because separation anxiety is real, and because they don't know where they are or what or who they can trust, know that a redeeming God is real. You just hang on to him. If you're in those teenage years, oh my word, my parents could write a whole book about teenage years, right? Hang on to a redeeming God. Trust him for your life, trust him for their life, and watch him write a story that only he gets the glory for. And we get to be a part of it. How good is that?
Amen. Oh, my friend, that is so good. That blesses me so much. And I'm just so grateful for your story and your heart and your ministry and your willingness to share with us today. You mentioned your book. I want to give you
Yes.
opportunity to share that a little bit more, how our listeners can get a copy, learn more about your story, and connect with you. How can they do that?
Oh, thank you so much for that opportunity. I would love to connect with your listeners. Probably the best place to visit is my website, AndreaLennonMinistry.org. Whenever you go to my website, you can learn about those 3 ministry branches. Andrea Lennon Live, you can see my calendar of events. Catch me at a live event coming your way, hopefully in 2023 or 2024. You can order a copy of God in the Window. I have 5 books actually that are available. So you can order a book. There's free ebooks that you can download, and then you can join the Girl on the Go community, which we have a Facebook group, we have an Instagram page, we have a blog, we have a podcast. Like, subscribe, share, all the details. That's the place to connect with me. If you are in women's ministry leadership and you'd like to connect with me through the Arkansas Baptist State Convention, you can visit our website at absc.org/women. There's all kinds of resources that are available to you there, and it would just be our privilege to serve. So keep on keeping on, and know that God sees you, he loves you, and that you can trust him with your life.
That's so good. Well, listeners, I will have all of those links in today's show notes so that you can head over right now as soon as you hit stop on this conversation and click to order that copy, click to connect with Andrea and all of the amazing work that God has her doing. My friend, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for your time and all that you do.
Thank you.